Welcome to the Low Production, High Value Show with your host, Andrew Jenkins. On the show, we'll be exploring the world of entrepreneurship, social media, and the growing digital landscape. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, you know that the world of business is constantly evolving and changing. And in today's digital age, it is more important than ever to understand how social media and technology are affecting the way we do business. That's why on this show, we'll be talking to entrepreneurs and experts who have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with you. From the latest trends and technologies to the struggles and triumphs of running a business, we'll be covering it all. So if you're looking to level up your entrepreneurial game and become more digitally savvy, then let's get started with the Low Production, High Value Show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Today's guest is Michael Brito from Zeno Group. He is the global head of analytics for Zeno Group. And welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So let's jump into it. The work that you've been doing in the analytics space, there's this. There's no shortage of data and analytics stemming from the digital marketplace. It's just there's no shortage. It's a treasure trove of data, and perhaps overwhelmingly so. But curious to know, how did you gravitate to that area?
It's funny you asked that because I failed algebra in high school twice. And I was always afraid of Excel. Early in my career, I just did not like small cells and numbers and algorithms. And
So you're not a mathlete?
no. In fact, I suck.
Or you weren't?
I still suck at math. And the beauty about that is that there are tools today that can help you, right? And I remember the reason why I struggle with math is because, and data in general, is because big data is so overwhelming. You said it in your intro. You know, there's so much data, too much data in many cases, some believe, that it's hard to know where to start. And I think the big data, quote unquote, hashtag big data conversation is it's vague, it's not actionable, it's a thought leadership, terminology that people are using and not really understanding the context of what it means. And it wasn't until about 10 years ago where I had a mentor who taught me how to make big data small and look at one data point as an example and turn it into an action or an insight that could become an action. And I gravitated towards that. And ever since then, I've been like going 150 miles an hour, trying to figure out, how do I innovate? How do we improve? How do we correlate and extract information about an audience or about a group of individuals or creators or influencers or the media? How do we extract data so that we can understand and find white space for clients?
Is that manifested itself from the standpoint of, are you dispelling myths? Are you confirming or refuting assumptions that stakeholders are making with the data?
All of the above. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, when I look at the work that we do, I kind of compartmentalize it into two boxes. And I do that because I have ADD and it just helps me make sense of the world. On one side and one box is measurement and performance. So we have campaigns that are in market, could be a paid campaign, could be earned media, could be integrated. And we measure the performance. We build a dashboard. We are measuring click-through rates and sales and optimizing kind of in real time. On the left side of the box is what I would call research and analytics. So it's using data, publicly available data, to that's where we dispel a lot of the myths, right? Where we're understanding a group of millennials or Gen Z. One example is, we had a client who didn't think Gen Z was interested in sports. She read an article about how, the decline of sports in a certain city or region, and they're targeting Gen Z, so they didn't really want to take this sports angle. So we did an analysis on Gen Z and what they were publishing and talking about on Instagram, on TikTok, and even on Twitter. And we were able to show like, okay, well, it could be declining, but there's still large groups and subgroups and segments of Gen Z who are playing high school sports or enrolling in club sports and AAU. And they follow if they're in college, they're following their college team. It's a big thing. So that's just one small example of how you can use data to kind of not prove a client wrong or an internal stakeholder, but help provide and provide context into, you know, oftentimes we read a headline and we think that's the truth in politics and in everything, and it's not. It's usually one little sliver of truth, if that. So data can help, as long as it's defendable, can help dispel some of those myths.
The Twitter is the most open of the social platforms for extracting data and insights, but Twitter is not representative of the entire world. It has some biases, it has some leanings, and with recent disruption from Mr. Musk, there's been a bit of turmoil there too. How do you balance that? Like we have tended, and many of the social media listening solutions have tended to use Twitter by proxy, or when you look at just mention volume, Twitter dwarfs many of the others because of the API restrictions. So we're only getting comments on YouTube and comments on Instagram and those sorts of things as an example. So I'm wondering, how do you approach, or how do you balance the skewing of the insights because of the over contribution by Twitter?
Yeah, that's a great question and one I could talk about all day. But we do use Twitter as a proxy, as what I would call a Gen Pop as an example. And if I were to facilitate a research study, a survey, I would build a panel using some platform or solution, off the shelf solution, and I would find a sample size of 1,000, 10,000, maybe 15,000 Gen Z or millennials or people who live in California, as an example. And I feel like that is all that. I mean, there's bias in everything, right? Especially even with survey data, you're biased in the questions you ask. And so when I look at Twitter data, and I was a little freaked out when everybody's worried, like, what if Twitter goes away, and what if we're gonna have to use Reddit is another alternative, and we do use a lot of Reddit data. But I still believe, now there's leanings right now in any particular data set. There's going to be leanings. So I think it's the way that I look at it is it's observed behavior, right? So with survey data, with the focus groups and things like that, people know that they're being watched, right? They know that there's a reason for asking questions, and therefore they act a certain way, right? It's like if you go to the zoo, you watch a lion in the zoo, and he's not acting the way he would act in its natural habitat. Whereas if you were to go to a safari somewhere in Africa and you were to watch a lion, it'd be very different, right? The way that they interact with other lions and obviously the prey. And so when I think about social analytics, and even Twitter as falls into that, obviously, is it's observed behavior. So what groups of people, what types of articles are they sharing? What types of hashtags are they using? What types of content? And then scraping Twitter data is just one piece of it. It's then contextualizing it. So we using text analysis to understand, okay, if I'm looking for comments about Elon Musk or commentary about a political campaign, I would pull in all the data, right? And I can pull it into a social listening platform and try to figure it out. But text analytics will help. It uses natural language processing to cluster context into common themes and topics, and understand what is the nature of the conversation about Elon Musk. Oh, there's a big conversation about him being a right-wing extremist. Over here is a big conversation about him being an entrepreneur and being one of the founding partners of PayPal or whatever. So that, you can do that with any data. And that's what I love about text analysis. And so Twitter is still a proxy, and it's still heavily used by B2B and healthcare audiences, heavily. So maybe not as much by Gen Z, and certainly not Gen Alpha when they get older, but I still think it's a valuable source of a data source.
Well, I agree. But you raised an interesting point in terms of the observed behavior. And the two things to I guess, add about that. I have a background in film and television, and documentary filmmaking, and when you put a camera on someone, their behavior changes. And there's this expression or this term, cinema verite. So you want as much truth as possible. So sometimes documentarians will put a camera on someone for days, so they get used to it. So they start to realize it's not, or like tune it out so it's not there, so they don't feel as observed. But still, that takes some time. But the other thing with that is for this observed behavior, we conducted some social media listening around insurance. And I want to get your take on this. People don't talk much about insurance, or even if they do, it's not necessarily with excitement or joy or anything like that. So it's having to, what I call, come at it from another angle. They don't literally talk about insurance, but they talk about life events and things that have an implication towards a conversation about insurance with an insurance company or a financial advisor or what have you. And so I wanted to ask you about your approach to, I'll call it, inverting the conversation to find the insight. Because, like I said, people aren't literally necessarily talking about the thing you want to know about, if that makes sense.
That totally makes sense. It's ironic that you bring this up because we work with an insurance company, one of the largest, and we did an analysis on the I wouldn't call it the insurance conversation either, because there's no such thing really. It's
I can't wait to buy a policy today.
I know. Nobody, they may go to
Said no one ever.
Exactly. But I think you bring up an interesting point, right? When and I'll get to the insurance question, but I just want to kind of a parallel path, the B2B buyer journey, right? People don't necessarily say, I'm looking to invest in new software for my security solutions, right? They don't say that, but they might say, we had a data breach, right? Or we need to scale, right? And some of this language can be used to provide insight into the conversations, the media, the channels that they're using based on where they are in the purchase journey. And it's the same thing with life events. When we did this analysis, we just by pulling in the conversation, right? And insurance was a part of the keyword query, but it was very broad, right? But then we also pulled in keywords like driver's license, new home purchase, even conversations around my parents or my mother or my father or my dad passed away. So all these like life stage events, and and we were able to like look at the conversation, and just by and not even plotting anything anywhere, the clustering of that analysis, it was clustered in those life events. There was a huge conversation about 16, 17-year-olds talking about getting their license, and now they need to get insurance, or parents talking about, oh my God, my kid has, I need to get them insurance now, right? Or I was just rear-ended. What do I do? Or I just crashed my car. I need to get it fixed. Or I just got married, or we're trying to look for a home here. All of those things are, to me, indicators of where an insurance company might be able to participate in a conversation. And so I think it's interesting you brought that up, because I think we think alike, because that's really the only way in my mind to provide actionable insights is to correlate the data with what's important with the user or the audience or whoever it is you're analyzing.
Well, and the challenge that was presented to us, or that arose, was, to your point about life events that are conversational triggers about potentially for insurance. And I gave one example, and this was we used to use Nuvi, which you're familiar with, and they had this great spreadsheet tool where you could rapidly build combinations of phrases. But like one example was like, how many different ways can you describe being pregnant or expecting? Like, I'm pregnant, I'm expecting, the family's growing, bun in the oven, like from lingo to just blatant, I am pregnant, like standard language. And it's figuring out, or, kind of, brainstorming how many different ways could that be said. and potentially not just in English, depending on whether it's a global brand or not. And are there unique phrases in different regions to say the same thing? All that, and so that it's sometimes setting up the query isn't the problem; it's the tuning of the query afterward, to keep peeling back the onion to get rid of the irrelevant and get to the nuggets of gold.
I spend hours building queries, honest, and I love it. I love just trying to get the most accurate conversation possible with that. And you bring you so you were talking about the spreadsheet. Well, we recently started using ChatGPT to write Boolean, and it actually is strong. You can give it commands to write a Boolean and separate the keywords by or statements or and statements. And now, as with any AI tool, it's never going to be perfect. So there always has to be kind of a human layer, and even with analysis, right? You can't just plug in a query into Brandwatch or Nuvi and then send a report to the client. Like there has to be a human layer, and so when you were talking about that, it brought me. I was intrigued at ChatGPT and what that did.
Well, it's I was recently asked by a client about what's your take on Chat GPT and AI, and I said I've been having some fun with it. I was working on a social media audit for a client, and they're in the food and beverage category, and they have a well-known cracker brand. So I asked ChatGPT to describe the cracker as ifs expressed by William Shakespeare. And I shared that, and I said, like, brands are having fun with ChatGPT to just play with and have it do something different. And I said, here's an example. If I'm not trying to be sacrilegious with your brand, but if you wanted to have some fun, because this is, ChatGPT is top of mind with people and so on. But nonetheless, it is still a tool. There has to be human intervention using the programming garbage analogy, garbage in, garbage out. ChatGPT is only as good as the prompt you give to it. And so I will be following up with you about the using it in the Boolean instance, because I just look at it as it's not going to replace all these people that are concerned. Oh, it's going to replace me. No, it's going to potentially make you more productive. Now, for some organizations, that may mean they may hold back about their hiring and make their existing team more productive by applying tools like this in certain instances. Time will tell.
I read an article. The came out a couple weeks ago in Fortune, and it was talking. I guess one of the reporters had asked ChatGPT what jobs are going to be at stake as a result of conversational AI or generative AI, and ChatGPT responded with data entry, and I can't remember the second one, but it was alluding to more jobs that are repetitive in a sense. So, and there's RPA software that is also doing the same thing. But then the third one was journalists or writers, and I just found that to be interesting because I've been a user of Jasper, which used to be called Jarvis, and it's been around since 2001, and it's an AI copywriting tool. And they didn't have a chat feature until ChatGPT launched theirs, and they launched theirs. But I've written several blog posts with Jasper, and it's a starting point. It's the foundation, and then you layer in your tone of voice, your experience, your transitioning. But it's amazing. It does save time, and it works really well.
Well, I used ChatGPT recently. I took a chapter from my book and I pasted it in and I said, summarize this chapter. And it did. And then I took the summary. I mean, it didn't write a summary like I would write it, but it wrote a summary. And it was, comprehensive enough. But that wasn't my objective. Well, one, I was just like, okay, let's see what it can do with, 5,000 words. And what will it take it down to? I then took that summary and I plugged it into Tome, the AI-driven presentation application, and I said, create a presentation based on this summary. And it generated 8 slides. I didn't like the look of them, but it broke down the summary into a flow. That's really what I just like. So, okay, in the span of 15 minutes, I had the layout of an 8 slide PDF that I can post on LinkedIn. Now I've since we've done some iterations of like, so now we're down to like 6 slides, which shows different visuals, and I cut back on the text a little bit, but like from the standpoint of instead of starting from a blank slate, I took an existing content asset, which was my book, summarized a chapter, and turned it into another piece of content for social with with some intervention. So
That's pretty sweet. I need to follow up with you. I need to follow up with you on that on your process of summarizing the 55,000 word chapter, because oftentimes I'll come across a report, and I've even reached out to the team at Jasper about why you can't do this, but like being able to point to a URL or upload a PDF of a report, let's just say a Gartner report, or a report on the state of the consumer in 2023, and summarize it. Like, here's the PDF, summarize it into either a couple paragraphs, for content. And so at the time, Jasper couldn't do it, but it sounds like ChatGPT can do something similar, right? You just have to get the actual text, copy and paste it in there. I wonder if it's public, you can just drop a URL in ChatGPT and say, "Hey, on this URL, summarize the text from this URL." I don't know if they can do that or not.
I would have to test it. What I had done was I was able to copy and paste from the original source, so I was just literally pasting the whole chunk of text. So I mean, right into the little field. But to your point, well, it's it's kind of analogous to an abstract in a library for a book. Like here's the 250 word abstract. Well, how was that arrived at? So could Chat GPT do that for me? But like I said, it's still just a tool. I think that there will always have to be someone doing oversight, to one, make sure it doesn't sound like it was written by a non-human, because it's still. I mean, I mean, I'm still absolutely blown away by it, but there's still an aspect that was like, doesn't sound, as human as one might like, but amazing nonetheless. Um, and even like I said, the example I gave of it built a presentation, but then you kind of go, well, the summary is great, but it's a little text heavy for slides. So, but 90 got me 80-90% of the way there. It was, but we mustn't forget, it was based on something I wrote. So the foundation or the underlying asset wasn't written by it. It was written by me. I just had to do some extra stuff to it. So, and I don't say that to take credit. I haven't played at it to say, start from scratch and do this. I've sort of, all of my prompts have stemmed from giving it something to interpret versus, well, I will say, it was just for the heck of it, I asked it to give me 10 questions to ask to a digital marketing analytics specialist. And that's how came up with the original list. Not knowing full well, I wasn't going to, like I said, not verbatim, but it was like, okay, if it gave me four that I wouldn't have thought of necessarily myself, then I've just expanded the conversation with very little effort. And that was my perspective on it. So.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Social media has become an imperative for almost every business. Discover how to successfully implement an effective social media strategy that is supported and integrated throughout every part of your organization with this essential book from our host, Andrew Jenkins. Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling an Integrated Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization, is now available from Amazon or KoganPage.com.
There's a software. They're fairly new. It's called Content at Scale, and it's an AI and platform. And what it does is, it's kind of expensive, but it's like $500 a month, and you can write up to 20 blog posts. So what you do is you basically write a brief, and obviously garbage in, garbage out scenario, and you click submit, and it literally writes a 2,500 word blog post. And it's crazy. And what's interesting, and when I was talking with a guy one of the I think the founder, he was telling me they have, and I don't know outside of the AI, the different levels of AI, like the output did not sound like an AI. That was like the key kind of, point here is their platform, they run it through different variant testing, so it's human. And I certainly changed it and put my tone on it, but I was actually thoroughly impressed with the tool.
Well, when I think about what you would pay for even two blog posts, or even $500 might pay for one on the low end, and you get 20. Yeah, but I mean, yes, you had to write the briefs, but still, like you would give guidance to, if you outsource to a writer, you would be giving them a brief or some sort of guidance or direction about what you wanted. Jeez. Well, you've made me think. I just posted today like a little 3,000, is it 3,000 characters? Yeah, 3,000 characters LinkedIn post, and I'm taking a riff on persuasion, and I'm using as the like as reference point the movie 12 Angry Men. So now I want to go, and now I want to go to Chat GPT and say, what are the key learnings related to, or what were the methods or strategies that Henry Fonda's character applied to persuade the other jurors? Now, I had gave it my interpretation in the post that I wrote. I'm curious to see if Chat GPT would agree.
Was that Harry Fonda? Was that Henry Fonda?
Yeah,
I didn't in the original, right? The
in the
black and
original,
white. Yeah, I was
1957.
I watched that in high school, I think.
Well, what's interesting is so I watched it. I had seen it, but I also watched it again in my MBA program 20 years ago in a leadership course. And my father, who worked for Canada's largest telecom for his entire career, but he retired from said telecom 40 years ago, they used that movie for sales training when he worked there. So that's how long a resource it's been to people beyond just entertainment. And so anyway, it's still,
Another good sales movie is Boiler Room
yes.
with Vin Diesel. It's a great movie.
It's not necessarily behavior you should model, but it's a good learning.
No, 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 not that part. But the persuasion, right? The gift. I call it the gift of gab. Salespeople need to learn how to talk.
The well, speaking of standing the test of time, you've written a number of books over the years, and about digital marketing, analytics, but as well mobilizing employees as advocates. And I'm curious to hear one, sort of what inspired each of the books, and how that journey has evolved as you've moved from topic to topic. Has it mirrored what you've seen in the work that you've done with clients and stakeholders?
It was definitely my journey, and being early to social media and working internally at a large enterprise company. I was at Intel at the time. My first book came out, and understanding how complex it was. And so my first book, Smart Business, Social Business, was published in 2011, but I wrote it in 2009, 2010. And it was still early. I mean, social media was around, but internally people were still trying to figure it out. So it was really meant to be a blueprint for organizations to think about before you even start a Facebook page at the time. You have to make sure you have the infrastructure internally to account for that, right? You probably already have 50 Facebook pages at the time. And some companies had like 100, like everyone was creating Facebook pages at that time. And so it was really meant to urge enterprise leaders to take a step back and say, first of all, let's get our ducks in order for internally. Let's make sure we have the right software, right? Is it Jive? Is it ClearSpace? Is it Lithium at the time? And then once we understand how to manage social media internally, then let's build a plan and figure out how to communicate with customers. And so that was my first book. My second book was a couple years later.
If I may interject, just before we leave the first book, you must have been a bit of an outlier then, because that was so early. Like Twitter wasn't even, what, 4 years old by then? I'm just using Twitter as an example. So were you sort of an island unto yourself being an evangelist for all this at Intel?
Well, at the time, not at Intel yet, kind of, but there was this whole idea, like the term social business was, I mean, in the original term of social business had nothing to do with social media. It was actually how it was more focused on social, um, uh, what we would call ESG today, and how business needs to be, empower social change. Essentially, is really what it was original.
Social impact?
Yeah, and so we kind of took over the word, and we're using it as this idea of becoming a social organization. That was another kind of key, buzzword at the time. And so externally, like there weren't a lot of people talking about it because a lot of people who were working internally at companies, they were still, they I was early on, so I was lucky. I was in the right place at the right time to have a voice and to have a small platform to discuss these things with other individuals who have felt the same way. Internally, I was on an island, and I was also learning at the same time. So I made a lot of mistakes growing up too, but then also at Intel, and so but it was all learning that I kind of put into the book. So that was kind of my selling point, which is like there are things you're going to do may not make sense now, but here's why you should do it for the future. The second book was Your Brand, the Next Media Company, which was this idea now that you have your infrastructure created, right? Your internal processes, your workflows, your escalation, your crisis, your customer support. Now you can focus on storytelling. And in order to do that, you need to think like a media company. And media companies are really great at creating relevant content in real time. And so it was this idea that brands need to operate like media companies and create content and build this kind of content engine, right? So almost like building your marketing organization like a newsroom. You have to you have an analyst, you have to have creative, video producers, directors. You have to have somebody on air talent, right? A community manager, a paid media person, because things were going to happen and pop up in the community, right? Or in conversation. You need to be prepared to create creative content, not just a tweet, but creative too, to respond and provide value. And that was a fun book to write because, and quite honestly, in full transparency, I wrote these books also, and there was ego associated with it. I wanted to be, one of the first people to talk about these things and get it published. And at the time, and it's still hard to get books published, but it's easier now than it was back then. It was kind of good for me as my career, right? So that was the third book. I mean, I'm sorry, the second book. And it took me about 5 years before I wrote another book because it's just, it's a lot of work, right?
Life?
And life and young kids. And so the third book was
I was 6 months late submitting my book to the publisher, so
really my,
uh,
yeah,
3 or 4.
that's
Yeah,
funny.
not 5 years, but yeah.
Um, the third book was participation marketing, empowering employees to be brand storytellers. And it kind of built off the newsroom mentality. And I was like, okay, well, employee advocacy is a big thing. There's software out there, Dynamic Signal, Social Chorus, and a handful of others. And that started becoming a real thing with and a lot of these companies were using it for employee engagement, right? So like, let's get employees talking internally. And there was a group of others who said, well, that's great, but how can we elevate those voices externally through like thought leadership and things like that? And so that's exactly what participation marketing is. It's getting employees to participate, and almost like I equate it to a newsroom, right? A newsroom has journalists. And they're natural storytellers, and they're out there, they're reporting the news. Why can't a tech company do the same thing when you have really smart data scientists, engineers, product people who are building really cool technologies? Why can't you get them out there and give them a platform? And that's the genesis of the third book.
Well, this is 12 years ago. I was at a bank as their head of social media, and they had an issue. They had a huge internal demand for making employees more social. They did find a solution to make folks more social internally. But to your point, there was and it wasn't me pushing for it. There was already evidence of a keen interest, especially by mortgage specialists and financial advisors, to be social externally. The problem was, by doing so, they were putting the bank at risk from a regulatory and compliance point of view. So we vetted a number of different compliance solutions. It ultimately went to RFP, and one particular solution won. And it was just that, we were catching up to a behavior that was already burgeoning, and so the bank needed to get its arms around this rogue behavior, as I referred to it, and but to enable it so that and that same organization, we collaborated with a number of years later with a bank, and our stance was, we helped them build a content engine that they could inject into their platform, that a central party could then approve all of the content and push it out to mortgage specialists and financial advisors. Because my argument was, these employees, if people do business with the people who they know, trust, and like. And if I get a mortgage from a mortgage specialist, and then for the next 5 years, the only thing I ever hear from them is about the latest mortgage rates, I'm sorry, that does not foster a relationship. But if they know that I bought a house, a century home, or a fixer-upper, and I'm a DIY idiot who's trying to do it themselves, or I moved to a new place that I didn't know anyone, or it's totally new, things to do, places to go, that kind of thing, and they continue to foster that relationship through their content, and then periodically mix in bank agenda content, that's a far different situation. To your point, now the employees are participating in relationship building, not just marketing. And it's a long-winded sort of preamble or preface to a question for you. As you went through the process of authoring that book and people you spoke to, what was the receptiveness to a kind of like releasing employees to be more human through social, under the umbrella of the brand?
I think companies still struggle with this today. It's just not as a topic that's discussed much publicly, right? It's not. It used to be a thing. I remember when, early on, there was a guy. I'm not sure if you know him, Scott Monty, and Scott. Okay, he worked at Ford for a long time, and he really, yeah, yeah, and he built a huge brand for himself and Ford, and then he left Ford. And I don't know any details about what. All I know is he left Ford, and he's been gone ever since, and now he's doing other things. But that's a dilemma, right? Because he was getting a lot of press coverage around how Ford is doing just that, empowering employees, and Scott Monty was kind of the unofficial voice of record, for the company. And so the question is equity, right? So when when someone leaves this firm, they also take that equity with them. And so, and I'm sure that there's been other issues in the world where, there's litigation perhaps that says, well, you don't actually own that profile, right? You create it while you worked here at this company, and it's actually ours. It's an interesting discussion to have. And so I think that when now, because social media was so new, there were no compliance, there was no regulations or processes to think about. Now, social media policies are certainly front and center in all companies. But
People were still putting the wings on the plane while in flight.
exactly,
So.
yeah, exactly. So um, it's even when you work. I work for an agency, and I don't own the agency. It's a corporation, and so I have to be careful about what I say. Am I publicly talking about my perspective on how to use data? Does that represent the company? And if so, could it be an issue, right? So I'm mindful of what I publish and what I put out there to say, this is my thought, this is my idea. It doesn't necessarily reflect that of my company. Or in some cases, I'll talk about, hey, at Zeno, we do this. We use text analysis to. So, I've been in the industry long enough, and as you have too, to know like when to prompt those particular that language.
Well, I remember Richard at Dell. And so like it was his name and the brand as a Twitter handle. And we have a wireless company, a telecom company here, and their social media team adopted the same nomenclature for Twitter handles, and it was Mary Rogers Mary is a friend of mine, and she was the director of social. She had her own personal Twitter account, but her corporate comms Twitter account had the brand attached to it. And but I mean, there was that spoke to a little bit of early adoption and some maturity by some organizations. Like Dell was an early sort of trailblazer in that area. And I had an exchange with Scott Monty because of there was an offline activation campaign where it was a pop-up dinner event to test drive a new Lincoln MKZ or MKZ for the American audience. And I attended and I won a 48-hour test drive with said vehicle. And that whole experience was great. The experience of having to go pick up the car myself, drop it off myself, and nobody cared that I was a potential customer. It was just an awful experience. And I shared that with Scott, saying the brand promise is up here in the media, but the execution at the dealership level, which is owned by someone else, but they do represent a particular brand, I said was like night and day. And I said, Scott, I'm not faulting you, but I just thought you might want to know. And he took it back to like. And this is that's not just for Ford. That is for all brands. Is that now in the social sphere, if you have a bad offline experience, it could manifest itself in social as you vent or rant.
Yeah, 100%. Interesting story. Hey, side note, Andrew, I do have a 10 o'clock.
Yes. Well, I guess. The one of the ones I like to close with is to fellow digital marketers and aspiring analytics specialists. Maybe it's the distinguishing between vanity metrics and metrics that provide actionable insights. I guess what sort of one sort of takeaway would you like to leave us with, or if we were to do one thing, what should it be when it comes to analytics?
I want to be clear: vanity metrics are still important, right? It's not something you lead with. It's not something that you rest your career on, but it is important to look at engagement rate. It's important to look at impression data and reach data. Obviously, understanding how to get someone from impression to a sale. The broader story is more important. So don't neglect the vanity metrics. And I'm in meetings all the time. Oh, these are just vanity metrics, but like they're afraid to talk about impression data, and they want to make sure that everybody knows that I know it's a vanity metric. So I'm going to say this is just a vanity metric, but so my philosophy on that is all data is important, but you have to look at it through the context of the entire journey and how you get an impression to a sale or a repeat sale is the value. If you can learn how to equate and map and understand how to move a user from that impression to buy and then repeat buy, that is where you could be successful. And you can't do that without looking at vanity metrics.
It's never losing sight of its connection to business objectives.
That too. That's a very good. You said it more articulate than I did.
No, I'm not going to lay claim to that. Well, listen, thank you so much for this. Great insights. Hopefully I didn't tell too many of my own stories.
No, you did. This is a really fun podcast. Thank you, Andrew, for the time, and it didn't even feel like it felt like a conversation. That's exactly what you said it would be. So, and it was.
Well, thanks so much. And I'll be sure to let you know when everything's ready to go so that you can share it yourself.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Be sure to give us a rating and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out Volterra at volterradigital.com to learn more about how they can support your social media marketing.